Hello, everyone. Welcome to Revolutionary Health. I'm Charles Stevens, and I'm the Executive Director of the County Project.
Hi, I'm Damian Denson.
Hi, I'm David Malebranche.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited this evening because we decided to not only do a panel, so Damian joins us, we're also doing it live with the audience, so that's also really incredible. And who do we have with us so far? As always, we will try to do our best to get to your comments. So we invite you to comment, ask questions. If we don't get to you, please don't be mad, but we'll really try to get to all the comments. And certainly, please be sure to like us on Facebook, so like the page, subscribe to our YouTube channel on thecounternarrative.org, and follow us on Twitter and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're everywhere. So this evening, we're talking about toxic friendships. But before we get into the discussion, we wanted to recap what I think to be one of the great moments of our time. One of the great, this will definitely go down as one of the definitive moments in our movement history, for which our very own David Malebranche gave an earth-shattering speech at the International AIDS Conference in Amsterdam last week. So, David, would you mind sharing a bit about the talk and how it felt and what was
Yeah,
the speech?
yeah, sure, I can. I guess the International AIDS Conference is like the biggest international conference dealing with HIV, and it's both scientific and activism. It's been going on for, I want to say, like 25 to 30 years, something like that. It's been around for a while. And so it brings people from the global community, and it can be anywhere from 15,000 to like 20, 30,000 every year. So back a few months ago, I was asked to do a plenary speech, um, which is pretty big time. And they wanted me to talk about the HIV treatment cascade, how people go from testing, finding out that they're living with HIV, going all the way to, being undetectable and being on medications. And so what I decided to do was unapologetically put Black same gender loving men at the forefront of this because they wanted me to talk about vulnerable populations, but typically when we talk globally, vulnerable means, the impoverished, sex workers, people who are criminalized for living with HIV. And that can be in the United States as well, but it tends to be more on a global focus that people don't see the United States as having vulnerable populations. And so I just kind of took what it means to be vulnerable, kind of flipped that on its head, called out the medical community, said we have to be doing better. And if we see that a lot of Black gay men aren't getting to undetectable, instead of just blaming the community or saying it's something wrong with us, actually start to examine our systems, how we're delivering care, how we're putting the treatment cascade out. And then at the end, I wanted to end on a affirming note. So I just kind of was just talking about Black same gender loving men in general and just how many of us are actually in the field doing good work and what we can do to take better care of ourselves. And so I was nervous as hell. It was a tough thing to do, and it was tough for a number of reasons. One of which was that I had tested positive myself in 2007, and so I had to tell my parents that on FaceTime before I flew to Amsterdam, which was hard as hell, because I didn't want them to find out through the internet. And when I did the speech, I wanted the speech to understand that, existing as a Black same gender loving man, being a physician, being a public health advocate, and then also starting in the work of doing work with HIV in 2000, maybe 1998, 2000, and then testing positive myself in 2007, that was hard. My parents weren't as supportive initially as I wanted them to be. And so I had to kind of juggle whether I wanted to put myself out there in that when they didn't want me to include that in the speech. They were worried about whether it would affect my career, whether it would bring shame on them and the family. And so there was a lot of stuff swirling. So for me, it was a very challenging thing. I couldn't enjoy the conference. I couldn't sleep. And I got there Saturday night and my speech was on Thursday. So like I literally had 4 or 5 days to work on the speech and think about it. There were some nights I didn't even sleep, so I couldn't enjoy myself until that Friday. So I just basically went up there, I put it all out there, and I was in tears afterwards, and partly during the speech. And most people didn't know all that was behind the speech. They just knew me coming up there and doing it. But I think for me, it was personally, it was a very challenging thing. But I was happy I did it. because my community was there. There were a lot of researchers, friends, colleagues in the community that sat up front. There were tons of Black same gender loving men who were there, both internationally and from the United States. And they really showed me a lot of love. So when I left the stage and came back, there were like 20 people and they started applauding, and I just burst into tears. And I was very thankful. And it's very true. Like we say a lot of times, as Black same gender loving men, we have to create our own communities. We have to create our own families and pick our own families. And nowhere was that better exemplified than at that moment, because at a moment where my parents were still dealing with the shock of what was going on and maybe couldn't support me as well as they wanted to, my non-biological family stepped up and was there. So it was a wonderful thing. So
what was the response like?
From who? Just everybody.
Once you got back, I imagine you've gotten lots of emails.
Yeah.
From you for your
emails, and it's interesting because it's like a global community. So there were white researchers, Indian folks, people in Africa that have emailed me, sent me messages on Facebook, and thanked me for my transparency. A lot of people, and what was funny about it was that, talking with my parents, they were all kind of wound up about this one sentence at the beginning where I disclosed. But everybody remembered the rest of it. They remembered an analogy I made about the treatment cascade being analogous to a restaurant business. And if people didn't come back to your restaurant, would you blame the customers, the consumers, or would you look at your product, your placement, your service, all that kind of other stuff? So people remembered other things, which is the way I thought it was going to be. And it turned out to be that way. Like people focused on the other stuff rather than, kind of that one part of it. But I think it was important to give them my full context. And I would have left the speech and I would have said, I didn't give all of myself if I kept that one truth out. I thought it was important for them to hear every angle that I was coming from. And so, to me, it's just a lesson in learning that, you can never, it's good to go into everything with representing your whole truth. And other people may not know it, but you'll know when you don't come in as fully authentically yourself. And so that was a good learning lesson for me, and a challenging one. And people think it's easy to get up there and do that shit. It's not. It's not. It's really challenging. It's hard up there to give a fucking speech in front of like thousands of people in the international community, and most of them don't know who the fuck you are. And then you have to actually do all this other shit on top of it and really I'm talking about vulnerable populations. And someone made the point to me like, well, you went up there immediately and made yourself vulnerable. And I was like, I guess I did. Like I just threw it all out there. So it's tough to do that. People think it's easy. It's not nerve wracking that, you do this, you've done commercials on TV. You do this kind of stuff with Revolutionary Health. You've been speaking before, but it still was wrecking me up until the moment I took that stage. So, but it was a good experience. It was a great experience.
What inspired you to be able to do that? Like, I imagine there might have been some reluctance.
Yeah, there was reluctance, but I just realized it's a platform. When I got invited to do that, it's a plenary speech. It's the biggest international conference on HIV. It happens every 2 years. It's in Amsterdam. You get to speak, and I've been there before. Your mug is put on these big ass screens. Like not only 2 screens, but the stadium is so big that there are 2 more screens with your face and everything on it. It's huge. And so I said to myself, I can't be on this platform and not advocate for what I'm passionate about. Like that's a privilege. Like that's a blessing that I was allowed to occupy that space and do that. So I took full advantage of it.
Awesome.
So
what was your charge? What's the next steps that you challenge the community to do?
Us as in like Black gay, Black same gender loving men, or the medical community?
Either. Because I didn't get to hear the full speech, so I don't know how you presented it.
So the medical community, I told, and I didn't want this show to be like a lot of this, but I get it. We'll just roll with it. No, that's okay. I appreciate that. But I think I want the medical community to be intentional and mindful of what they do. And so the medical community in HIV is big on HIV stigma. But yet when you see researchers do presentations, when you see them or publish articles, they always use the term HIV infected.
Right.
And I remember hearing a white woman living with HIV for 30 years say at a conference in Florida that she didn't like to think of herself as infected for 30 years. And so how do you not perpetuate stigma? You change the wording. You change it to living with HIV or HIV positive in your medical journals, in your abstracts, in your write-ups, to show people that you're not stigmatizing that. If the HIV community is saying, look, this wording is problematic, you have to face up. So I wanted the medical community to, just realize a lot of the stuff that we do, and we may not be the ones that know what the community solutions are best. We may say, I also said, just because they call us hard to reach, like Black saying gender loving man, that's one thing. We're not hard to reach just because you can't find us. And so those were some of the points that I was making. And then to us, I was saying, I created this whole new, like, it wasn't a treatment cascade, but it was like a sexual health cascade, and just encouraged us to realize that it's not un-African to be same gender loving. It's not immoral. It is a revolutionary act for us to love on each other. The CDC, the NIH, the WHO, UNAIDS are not going to save us. But we're the ones we're waiting for, that we've been waiting for. Like, we have the solutions. And so we have to kind of take accountability for ourselves and love on each other more. And then hopefully that'll get us across the finish line. But it's going to take parts of both the medical community and our community to kind of get to the end of that. I don't think we can just sit back and blame, like, the medical folks are all fucking up. Like, we have to look at ourselves. But the medical community can't say, look at those Black same gender loving men, look at those Black gay men. They don't know what they're doing. They're doing this, they're doing that. It's like, no, how could you be doing better? So I think both of us have to look at ourselves and be like, what can we do better if we want to get more men living with HIV virally suppressed? A big part of the conference was that they did this huge study with gay couples, one partner being positive, the other one negative, 80,000 sex acts. You probably know this. It's called Partners 2. 80,000 condomless sex acts over years, 0 transmissions of HIV when the positive partner was undetectable. 0, not 1, not 2, 0. And so a lot of people were pushing this kind of undetectable equals untransmittable, the U equals U slogan. But the problem is that it's great in theory and in a study, but in the real world, how are we getting people there? And so that's part of the issue. So
awesome.
You got thoughts on that? You got thoughts on that? I know you got thoughts on that.
I do.
See the wheels turning.
Yeah, come on, bring it. Yeah.
Well, you're right. I mean, the real world environment doesn't create opportunities for our community to maintain undetectable status.
Right.
And if that is the key, then we have to do more work to get there. Right. And you're right, in a scientific environment or a sterile environment, it's easy to say that, but when it's transferred to the real world, it's much more challenging. And we know the social determinants and all of that affect treatment. So
right.
Still hard work.
Right.
See some comments. Daniel's with us. Daniel says, hey. Marcus Stanley. Randy is with us.
Okay.
Kenyon. Art Jackson. Hey, everyone. Sydney Skipper. Daniel says, we cried there. We're still talking about it now. So your talk is still definitely making its rounds. Daniel says 7,000 people were there. So it's quite an audience.
Wow.
I started hearing about, I knew you were giving a talk, but I started hearing about it. Like, people were telling me about it. It was like, wow. I knew you were gonna do it.
Well, whenever you do a speech, when you go over it in your mind, and it was 25 minutes, so I had to keep rehearsing it over and over again with a timer. And I must have rehearsed it and edited about 15 times after I got there, just to make sure I was there. And you get sick of saying the same thing, and you don't know how an audience is going to respond. So there were moments where I would say some shit, and people would start applauding, and I was like, oh, they like that. And, you kind of don't realize, because you're speaking to yourself the whole time. You have no idea how someone hearing it for the first time is going to respond to it, but people responded positively, so I was happy. And I saw a lot of the plenaries, and a lot of them were scientific. There was one that sat up there, and he didn't even look at the audience. He just looked down and just read. And so I kind of knew that as long as I engaged and looked at people and did this, he's brilliant, but
a little socially awkward.
Right.
A little awkward.
So that's what it was. But it was okay. It was a great experience. I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad I did it the way I did it. So I have no regrets.
Awesome.
I'd love to post your speech on the blog. Maybe we can post your speech.
I probably will. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll get the YouTube. There's a YouTube.
Oh yeah, awesome. Okay, now I get to hear it.
Perfect.
So we're here wow, I'm just so full. I'm so proud of you and
thanks.
inspired. Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
I'm so grateful that to just be in the just know amazing people. Like I feel so lucky
Really?
to have friends.
Really?
So we're here to. So I guess we should transition to toxic. I'm like trying to figure out the best way to transition.
Right. From something so affirming to toxic friendship.
I know.
Right. It's awkward now.
It's such a moment, and now it's like. So let's just go in. So David, what's a toxic friendship?
Oh Lord. And I spoke a lot. I'll say what a toxic friendship is, and then I want to hear Damian because Damian said he had a
David
story
has
to
a
tell.
lot of thoughts.
But
on
like,
it.
I guess a toxic friendship could be, when you have a friend and you guys are getting along, but then I think over time, like things may happen, situations may occur, things that kind of throw monkey wrenches.
Like,
in
what's
it.
an example?
So an example could be somebody is sabotaging what you're trying to do, or always talks bad about you, or always, when you do something positive, they're always the negative Nancy or the Debbie Downer that tries to say something or bring you down, or maybe jealous of you for some respect. If two friends, one of them sleeps with another's partner at the time, like those kind of things can happen. And so I think toxic friendships can embody any of those situations. Yes.
Yeah, just having someone who doesn't want the best for you, I would say. And that can be acted out in a lot of the ways that you just mentioned. But fundamentally, just being in a relationship with someone who's not, doesn't have your best interest at heart at the end of the day.
And Damian, I think you had a story you wanted to share with the audience.
Not necessarily a story. It's just that, I assume a lot of us have gone through this. I came out in the late 90s, so the world was a different place, I'll say that, in the sense that the internet and social media wasn't the way it exists today.
Right.
But I also came out in a time when, prior to me going off to college, I didn't have other same gender loving friends or associates. So I felt lonely growing up. So going off to college, immediately meeting other people that looked like me, thought like me, it was an epiphany that even existed.
Right.
So the gravitation towards one another was so energetic because we had all been seeking each other the whole time.
Yeah.
In hindsight, what I've learned is that those that you immediately attach yourself to shape how you continue to come out and grow. So if you meet some late girls, you might end up being a late one. If you meet a group of friends who are more positive and ambitious, that will have its impact on you too. But you have to be discerning enough to know which squad you attach yourself to. So for me, in 97, I would say, I met my first group of friends and started out with 5 of us. And today there are 3 of us. And the 2 that were voted off the island wasn't due to their deaths. It was due to their behaviors. So I guess
But was there like was there like a probation? Like, was there like, when they had their first transgression, did you write them up?
Well, this is the thing.
A warning, and then.
Well, this is the thing. When you go when you go through group friendships where there may be one synergistic person who creates the bond for the entire group.
Mm-hmm.
So if that central figure is no longer there, then it weakens the bond of the other friends. So I think most friendships have that kind of energy. I don't even know how to describe it. So having that central person be the most toxic of the group, but having that discovery happening individually with us who were extended around this person. So one person would get betrayed, and then all of us would have to be like, well, I don't know, blah, 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 blah. Another person would get betrayed, then the rest of the group. It was only until all of us had our own individual betrayals in a sense.
So y'all were having conversations, kind of like a person. So
well, groups fight, family fight. Like
Yeah.
you just fight. That's just the nature. It just happens.
So there are
particularly when you're young.
alliances within the squad.
Alliances formed,
Alliances
but
formed.
what I'm
a survivor now.
Right, it was ended up like being a survivor. But to me, it was, you don't see. It takes time, especially when you're that young. It takes time to know that actually the problem is that person. It's not us and these individual fights that we're having. It's that person. So for me, it wasn't until I was betrayed that um, I made a decision that I'm walking away from this friendship because it all feels toxic, and now like I don't know who to trust anymore, and stepping out on faith in that revealed who were the real friends, and that's how the the like extension around that person morphed into where that person got excluded from everyone else. And so we were able to maintain a group bond just without that toxic person there. But that took a long time. It wasn't until I finished grad school. So that was in undergrad. It wasn't until we were still friends throughout graduate school. We all moved off, left. And this is in the early 90s where we would all get on conference calls because the internet didn't exist the way it exists now. And you'd be on the phone with everybody for like 2 hours at night. But
that was fancy. We just call each other on three-way.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But then I'll
bet you like a conference.
The third person has to call the other person. Then you can get more than three.
Yeah.
But it took a lot of growth for me to realize the toxicity in that person is the point I'm trying to make.
What was the final offense? It just was like you're the point of no return.
It was something that I had gone through that I had not shared, and it was exposed to everyone without my permission. I wanted to say something, and they didn't allow me that opportunity. And back then, it was a big deal, but even now, it's like actually that what I was so like holding on to isn't even that big of a deal today. But back then, it felt more important and larger than life. And I felt sabotaged and betrayed by not having the opportunity to deal with that in my own time and in my own way. But that having that snatched, like I couldn't forgive. And then the way that it was done, it was so like vindictive. Like the way reality shows are shown today, it was very much like that. And it was done out of their sinister pleasure. And I was shocked because we have been friends for so long. And I'm like, how could you do that? And like the defense was, like when you have friends and stuff and y'all read each other, y'all go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. To have something, to weaponize information in a way that you can't never come for me now because I got this on you, was the way it was handled. And I was like, you don't have my best interest. You really don't.
Was it done in like kind of a malicious way? Like it
malicious.
wasn't like playing around like, oh, if you're gonna spill my tea, I'm gonna spill your tea. It was more like, I'm gonna try to hurt you with this, or I got this hanging over your head.
It was done maliciously, and I had not even done anything yet to deserve that. Yeah. It wasn't like it was waited on and then used as a weapon. It was like, things look to be going well with the group right now, but let me throw this atomic bomb.
Did they ever apologize for what?
Oh yeah, I would get emails every 5 years. I would get an email.
So you were just done. You're like, there's nothing they can say. There's no forgiveness here.
No. Yeah, I was very much done. It wasn't
like, what would it take for you to forgive this person?
I have forgave them, but that doesn't mean I need to talk or have them in my life.
What would it take for them to be in your life again?
Oh, that is what they sealed the deal on that.
So it's done.
Like I don't feel.
Wait, and this was done like how long ago?
2002, because I had just came back from New York.
Y'all were like in your early mid-20s.
Mid-20s. Not too much, girl. Not too much.
No, I didn't mean it like that.
Right. Yeah. In my mid-20s.
Toxic host.
So you wouldn't because I'll say that, when I was young, when we're young, we do stuff sometimes. And because we're not, you're developing, your maturity level is still kind of like I know I've done stuff in my early 20s that I wouldn't do now, even in like interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, but
so you wouldn't even give them the benefit
it was
of like
evil.
we're young.
It was evil. That's the part that I can't circumvent. I can't circumvent the sinister nature of it because I had not done anything. Now I know I can read, I can go back and forth, and I know I'm that type of person. Like you don't want to get an argument, you don't want to date.
In my friendships, my friendships, I'm a witty lad, right? I'm clever.
Right.
I know, but I don't even do I I don't have friendships where we bond around that. One, because I don't have good parity around what to say. Like, I don't know what the rules are.
Like the boundaries and
so
stuff.
I'm the kind of person where if you say, you might do something you might consider surfacey, but I don't. So that's why I don't do it, because I'm like, I don't have a good sense of like what's appropriate and what's not.
Yeah.
So that's what, because I'm like, I'm gonna pretend like for our friendship, I don't even go there. And two, it's like, and I had this probably in my late 20s. I was like, I mean, I've seen the gay friendships where they just read each other for sport, and it's a part of.
Yeah,
but we're just playing. It's part of. That was never. I was in my friendships. I was like, we don't.
Never like that.
I'm like, why can't we just affirm each other? Like, I still to this day don't quite get it.
Yes.
So, but what I'm getting at is, I know for me and my experiences with, I guess, toxic friendships, sometimes the bond was usually around toxic. Like, my attraction to them was the toxicity. And then I would come back later. I'm like, oh, I guess I got poisoned by it too. Like, where we bond around. Sometimes it's fun bonding around people and stuff you don't like.
Yeah.
And then that becomes a bond where you just talk shit about, I mean, stuff I wouldn't do now, obviously. And part of what I've learned is that, how you bond and what the foundation of the friendship is really key to like the friendship. But I guess what I was getting at is that all that taken, it's like, it seems like it still informed how you choose friends now.
Yeah, I mean, it was the type of group friendship where reading was sport and reading was comedic, and it was the fun thing to do. Like, my skin is thick. I could take a read and I could, dish it back out. But this was more than that. This wasn't a read. This was a betrayal. So that's why I couldn't see through that. Yeah.
What about you, David? What's been your experiences with?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that Damian said, I think is important is like, because you can say, well, do you forgive that person?
Forgiveness.
And then do you come back with them? Is there a way to kind of get the friendship back somehow? And I think, the forgiveness is more for you than it's for the other person. Like, you have to let that go in your heart. But the forgiveness doesn't involve you getting back with that person and trying to recreate the friendship. I just think you have to know at a certain point, like, just because someone's toxic, you don't have any obligation to hang out with them because of a closeness that you had in the past or a different relationship. Like, you have to know, and it's not being shady or being mean. It's just knowing what you want to allow in your space.
Yeah.
I think for me, and I've been on both sides where I've done stuff. I'm not a malicious person, but I've done inconsiderate stuff with friends.
As a friend of mine once said, everybody's a little late.
Yeah. And so, I've done inconsiderate stuff. And I remember in particular, I slept with very close friends. He's like a little brother to me. I slept with his ex. They had been apart, broken up for 2 to 3 years. And I didn't initiate it, but I allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
And so I could have been, and I thought to myself, oh my God, while this is happening, we messed around like 2 or 3 times. And I said, oh my God, I'm going to take this shit to my grave. And I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. And then it came out in the most fucked up way possible. And he found out, and it just blew up everything.
Yeah.
And I was sorry. Like, I was really sorry because I broke it off with the person.
Yeah.
The person was like, what's the problem? And he was like, well, why? We could be soulmates. And just because you're best friends with somebody. And that's a true point. But still, like, I have those boundaries. And I think one of the things that happens is that we don't know the rules all the time. And so I remember having this conversation because me and my best friend, we used to cross-pollinate. So we were attracted to the same kind of dudes, right? So we were attracted to like thick, brown to dark skin, beard, all this other stuff. So we would know like our type, like, oh, you would get with that? And he'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, oh, me too. And I'd be like, oh, shit. And then he just kind of like separate. So there were times where people we had messed around with, people are laughing in the audience because they know this shit is true. But it's like, you have people where you could mess around with somebody and then you find out 2 or 3 years later, your best friend messed around with them. Yeah. And if they're not somebody you're invested in, you're not that worried about it. But one of the things that came out with it all, because after I did that initial insult, some things came up from a long time ago that he was holding on to that had nothing to do with me, that had something to do with an ex of his. And then all of a sudden, he started doing stuff to try to get me back. And even when we sat down and talked about, because it got to a point where it was like becoming this tit for tat thing. And I said, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. We realized we hadn't put rules on stuff. Like, is so-and-so off limits? Like, if I break up with a partner and it's 4 or 5 years later, and what if, you get along with that partner better than I did, or you're a better match with that partner? Are you okay with me dating them? Or do you need to check in with them? And some of my friends said, Well, if you're best friends with somebody, you don't need to have that conversation. I say bullshit
See,
to
I'm the
that
opposite.
because
Like,
I think you do need to have that conversation because you could be best friends, but maybe you've never gone down that road to that depth to like say, what do we do in this situation? Like there are no rules.
But see,
There's
I'm proactive about like I'm like with my friends, like these are the exes that are
off limits.
Community property, and these are the exes that are like, nah. And these are the exes where we would have to have a conversation about it. But
right.
But yeah, they're like some one because we all have like the sort of that one ex where it's like, nope.
But what was interesting is that
I mean, of course I don't care.
My friend who, to his credit, forgave me.
Okay.
But I think it had hurt him so deeply that I did that he started doing stuff that he didn't even notice he was acting out later. And then while I was thinking, okay, it's all right, everyone's moved on. I'm kind of playing like Darla from Queen Sugar, like I'm over my shit, so everyone else should be over shit. And everybody is still holding on to the shit I did in the past. So he was especially holding on to that. And one of the things that got him right, though, when we went up to New York City, we took a trip to New York City to see Rent together. And he sat down with me and he told me a situation where one of his best friends was a girl who was about to become engaged with her boyfriend. The boyfriend was about to meet her family somewhere else. And he exchanged numbers with the boyfriend and started texting the boyfriend.
That just got real Elon Harris.
Right.
Boyfriend came over to his house. He gave the brother head and was asking me after our situation, should I tell her? And I said, dude, do you remember how you put me through the ringer?
Right.
Because I didn't tell you that I slept with an ex that you had been broken up with for 2 or 3 years. You're sucking the dick of a good friend's about to be fiance right now. She isn't broken up with him. She's still together with him. What do you think? Like you got that hurt and it was someone from your past. Right. What do you think we'll do? And I think when I explained it to him that way, he realized like, oh shit. And I think what's important in this conversation is to realize that you can be on both ends.
Are y'all friends now?
No.
So what was the final?
It's such a long drawn out story. Literally, we were roommates. I moved to a different place. And then I ended up moving to Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And within a year of being in Philadelphia, he started telling people who had nothing to do with me about our situation from the past and dragging me, then bringing other people into it, and then getting involved in situations that he wasn't even a part of between friends trying to sabotage stuff. And when I kept trying to contact him saying, dude, can we talk? Because you're going around dragging my name through the mud about stuff that happened years ago. Like, can we please talk about it? And he just didn't respond. Oh, I'm really busy. Oh, I don't have time. Oh, I don't have this. And he kept staying on it. And after he did it was like 2 or 3 things that I had to hear from other people. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know what? I'm done. I was curious to find out what was going on with him. It turns out he had been married himself. He got married and he had a husband, but he was having trouble with his husband at the time. And so I think what happens is that misery loves company. So while he was going through his shit at home, he started trying to drag me through shit, just dredging up old shit for the hell of it. And that was the breaking point. I got to a point where I was like, I was curious at the beginning to find out why you're bringing up all this old stuff and then I got to a point where I was like, I don't care anymore what the reason is. I'm done.
I think also being happy, truly happy for your friends is a skill. And some people, especially if you have friends where their lives seem very charmed,
right?
And if you don't feel the same way about your life, I think sometimes it can be really
challenging.
And then there's sabotage, and it's one of the things that I've learned. Like I know I've had friends where it's like whenever I had an accomplishment or something just good happened, like they would have to come back with something negative or they critique me. It was just a thing.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that could also be an example of that. Like I'm trying to throw sand.
I don't know. I think the hard thing for me was that we I had to realize what I did. Like what I did, like I had responsibility. And I think in any of these things, like I could look at my friend now and be like, oh, well, the fact that he dragged this out for so long, but I was the one that incited this. If I hadn't slept with his ex back then and hadn't, what space was I in that I allowed that to happen? That was my fault. And sure, a lot of the stuff he did afterwards was fucked up. But I think at the end of the day, with these kind of toxic friendships, there's always a way you have to be able to look at yourself, either what you can learn from it or a thing you could have done better, or some way that you contributed to this dynamic. It's the same like in romantic relationships.
I'm gonna ask you what you learned from it, and then we're gonna take questions from
Damian.
our student.
Damian was
I just want to add one other aspect to that. In addition to misery loves company and people trying to drag others down. Even in the victimhood, though, there is a superiority complex that comes along with it. So if you have been betrayed,
Right.
you can tell that tale and sing that song and make yourself superior to another person in the telling and the singing all day long. So you have to also be careful that you're not doing that in order to make yourself feel superior or better than others. So I think people can get caught up in that, and that
Right.
sounds kind of like what I was hearing too when you were talking about the way that person was continuing to try to drag you for that. But that's all I wanted to add.
Right. Yeah.
So what do you think you learned? What was the lesson?
I mean, I think you have these conversations, and I stay away from if someone wants to do something messy like that. I just that's why I stay to myself a lot of the times now, because that really like scarred me, and I realized that I had to be better myself. And what I did was wrong, and I'm angry because we have been friends for like 20 years. Yeah, we have been friends for like 20 years. And actually, no, I lied, because the breaking point for me, because he had been up as my little brother to visit my parents with me several times. My parents loved him. While I was trying to understand why he was doing what he was doing, he flew to a nearby airport, called my parents, said he was going to come up and visit them, and went and visited them without even talking to me. And then my parents told me, "Oh, guess who came by to see us?" And I said, "Okay, so you don't have time to call me to explain to me why you were doing all this, but you have time to call my parents, schedule a visit, drive the 45 minutes from the airport to go see them, and then we can't even talk about this still." And again, it's not that I don't consider myself a victim in any of this at all, or superior to what he did, because I know what I did kind of contributed to his scars.
Yeah.
And so anything after that, like, I have to claim my own shit with it. I started that shit.
So I think we might have some comments from our audience. Did we?
No.
Well, Johnny was pointing at someone over there.
So I just wanted to ask, this is a bit of an aside. We're talking about relationships in general. I was asking, what is some advice maybe you would have about toxic relationships that are familial, that are not necessarily, I have a seriously a thing going on right now, but it's we have people in our families that we cannot even associate with, but their family.
Right.
I mean, like, I was raised with my first cousins are brothers and sisters.
Right.
And this is a first cousin issue, but I can't. So what, you know what I mean? Any advice? I don't want to get too graphic in terms of the situation.
Right.
No.
Well, for me, I had to save myself, in the saying that, I came out once I left for college, it was because that felt like a safe time for me. I felt that type of toxicity, particularly due to religion in my family. And for me, I made a conscious decision to look out for myself and to not entertain or allow the toxicity to seep into me. A part of the leaving home and going away to college, there was a choice where I could have stayed home and saved money, but I needed to leave. And my needing to leave was because of toxicity that I knew would be like continually fed to me. So in doing that though, I also had to realize that I picked up a flee aspect to my personality where when things get tough, I flee. And the most frequent place I flee to is academia. I learned that when things get tough, because I did that first time and it worked,
You get
and
another
I
degree.
get another degree. I get another degree and I leave and I go away to a city where I don't know nobody. But that became a pattern that I had to slap myself and be like, you can't even do that no more. You can't do that. You got to deal.
I got all the degrees.
You're finding the law school
No,
now.
I'm dealing now. So, and then even in doing that, I realized I missed a lot of time. My grandmother now, she's dealing with dementia. And I did leave home and did not look back. I came back for a few years and I went back to school. But I do see time lost, and I also developed some compassion, and I don't know what the issue is with your first cousin, but because my family issues were surrounded by religion, I learned to have more compassion for someone's beliefs, even though I disagree and they think ill of me or whatever they think of me. I still I can still love them as the family member, but not allow them to continue to denigrate my well-being. So that distance is more like that. Whereas I can still have a relationship with family, but they're not gonna make me hate me.
Kevin Ewing says, I heard recently at a talk that we are
That's the
all
homie.
okay. Okay,
That's the homie.
He made the cut.
He made the cut.
He
Right.
made the cut. And
Well, the original. I was talking about.
Oh wow, so it's deep. It's like y'all got a whole thing there. I don't even really. I'm not even close to anybody from my early 20s.
Really? That's okay. Go ahead. What was
I
Kevin
heard
saying?
recently at a talk that we are all at the same time both victims and abusers. I hope I pronounced this right. Is it Mahias Doc? You have to put yourself as a priority and remove the toxicity out of your life. Toxic people drain you and rob you of your inner peace. Yeah. But I think we're really about at time. Do we have any final thoughts we want to offer before? Any inspiration? Any?
I think one of the other things that I would say is that I also realized that that relationships can be seasonal. Even though the original squad that I had, we've been friends since '97 or late middle '90s. Also had to accept that some people won't be there that long or even for a lifetime.
Iana says people are like for a reason, a season.
Season.
Like, y'all didn't think
That's
y'all didn't think I knew Iala, did you?
Yes.
I know Iala.
But really, like
Iala been there.
accepting that and realizing that that's truth and that's life. It kind of buffers a lot of the hurt and when things fall apart, because sometimes you have to just let it go.
I mean, I'll definitely say that I grieve my friendships more than any of my relationships. Like my friends have always been like my family. So when my friendships don't work out, like I grieve them really hard. When I have to break up with a friend. So it's always. I mean, I think I've grieved friendships more than relationships, really. So it's always a tough choice.
Yeah, I agree. Friend, I still miss the friend that I'm not friends with. I miss him from time to time. So we hung tight and we did a lot of stuff together. I don't know. I think there's always something. Like I said, there's always something you can learn about yourself with it. And you could do something wrong, and it can be like front and center or something that's so obvious. But toxicity doesn't have to be like sleeping with a best friend's ex or disclosing somebody's personal information and weaponizing it against them. It could be like small little, almost like microaggressions, for lack of a better word, that people are doing to you over time that kind of build up. So I think always kind of trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Like, what would I do if someone did that shit to me? Or trying to give it context, like why are they acting like that? Why am I acting like this? And how am I contributing to the toxicity? I think it's always a good thing to do. But it's hard because I think at some point you just have to realize some friendships aren't meant to last forever. Some change and morph over time, and you used to be close and hang out and do all this stuff, and now it may be an occasional call from time to time. And so you have to be okay to grieve that, grieve the transition of it, grieve the loss of it, and then move on. As long as you're surrounding yourself with positive people, it's a good thing.
Some of my favorite people are people when we started out not so sure about each other.
That's true too. That's true too.
But we made it through.
Were you toxic to Damian when you
We weren't talking. We just didn't use. We just didn't use each other. Keep it real.
But the important part is that we love each other down.
Right.
Alvin was telling me last week that he what was it, Alvin? You actually had like a series of interviews with the people in your life where you did like exit interviews where it was like some people made the cut and some people didn't. Like you had to do, and maybe that's how it is. Every so often you might have to like refresh it. But thank you so much for tuning in. What's our topic next week? Does anybody know? What are we talking about next week? What's our topic?
I'm not sure.
That's so bad.
We'll figure it out.
We'll
come up with it.
Well, if you have any suggestions?
It's beards. I'm
Beards.
gonna be
A
gone
beard
next.
talk?
We're taking off next week.
We're off next week. Yeah, we're gonna do beards. So yeah, we're gonna do beards. Like how to keep your beard. I mean, obviously I have nothing, but like.
So this is
What
one of
are we
those.
talking?
This
Right.
is one
What
of
is
those-
You want to
no,
do
no,
our
no.
beard show? You want to do our?
You want to
beard
come
show?
on with the beard show? No, this is one of those. I think this is one of the medical ones where we're talking about like folliculitis, pseudofolliculitis,
Oh,
or hair
okay.
bumps. We're gonna be talking
Oh,
about beards
okay.
and how to take care of beards. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you want, I mean, you're kind of like a junior. You're a
junior
baby beard.
Yeah.
Well, we
Like-
can do different stages.
We can
of-
do
of the
different
beard.
stages. Talk about how you take care of it when your beard's like this
Yeah.
versus how when it's really like thick Philly beard. Because there are differences. There are differences.
There are differences.
Yeah,
I finally
come
get to
back.
say the Counter Project was taped before a live studio audience.
You've always wanted to say that.
I've always wanted to say that, so it's my
Exactly.
dream.
Nice.
But thank y'all so much. Remember, again, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, and join our email list. Thank you so much. That was fun.
Yeah.